The city never slept. Its narrow streets twisted like dark veins beneath the towering walls of stone, and lanterns flickered along the crooked alleyways, casting long shadows over puddles and refuse. This was the domain of rogues and thieves, of those who lived by cunning rather than sword, by wit rather than title. Among them moved Aylin, a young woman whose fire and defiance made even the most hardened criminals pause. Aylin's hands were small but quick, nimble as the wind as she slipped between stalls and rooftops. Her dark hair tied loosely at the back swung with every leap from one ledge to another. She had been raised in the underbelly of this city, among rogues who cared little for kings or laws, teaching her how to survive. And to survive meant one thing: never trust anyone fully. Tonight she was on a mission. A wealthy noble had grown arrogant, flaunting treasures that could feed entire rogue families for months. Aylin had been chosen, or rather she had volunteered, to infiltrate his estate. Her heart raced, not from fear but from the thrill of defiance. The city belonged to no one, yet everyone feared the nobles. Tonight one of their illusions would crumble. The estate loomed ahead, tall and proud against the moonlight. Its walls were cold, carved from stone that seemed immune to time. Guards patrolled lazily, unaware that the shadows themselves were watching. Aylin pressed her back against the wall, observing, planning, calculating. One false move, one misstep, and she would be caught. But failure was not in her nature. Aylin scaled the walls with ease, her movements almost invisible. She landed silently on the balcony, heart-steady, eyes scanning for the prize. A chest lay in the corner of a lavish room, adorned with gold and jewels that glinted even under the faint candlelight. She approached, carefully lifting the lid. The glittering treasures inside were more beautiful than she had imagined, yet her eyes caught something else: a small, ornate box engraved with patterns she didn't recognize. Her fingers tingled as she opened it. Inside was a delicate pendant, an heirloom, unlike anything she had seen before. Suddenly, the air shifted. A presence entered the room, commanding and cold. Aylin froze, the pendant clutched tightly in her hand. From the shadows stepped a man whose mere aura demanded attention. Kaelin, the Alpha King of the Northern Kingdoms, his dark eyes like ice yet filled with a strange fire, regarded her calmly. "You are bold," he said, voice smooth yet edged with authority. "Few dare enter a noble's estate without permission, and even fewer survive to leave." Aylin's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a spark of defiance. She had heard the stories of Kaelin, a ruler as ruthless as he was cunning. To encounter him in the flesh was another matter entirely. She straightened, meeting his gaze. "I survive because I choose to," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Kaelin's lips curved slightly, not with amusement, but with intrigue. "Most would bow, beg, or freeze," he said.
"Yet you."
"You do none of these. Why?" Aylin didn't answer immediately. She had been trained to speak only when it mattered, and every word here could cost her. Instead, she slipped the pendant into her pocket and made a subtle move toward the window. Kaelin's eyes followed her every movement, unwavering. "Do not think to escape so easily," he said, his tone neither angry nor threatening, yet it carried the weight of inevitability. Aylin hesitated, realizing that brute force would not serve her here. She needed wit. "Perhaps I wish to be caught," she said softly, her words deliberate. "Perhaps I'm not afraid." Kaelin's gaze sharpened. Few dared speak to him in such a manner, and even fewer survived the consequences. Yet something in her voice, in her fire, drew him in. She was reckless, yes, but in her recklessness was a strength, a spark that mirrored the very power he had mastered over kingdoms. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and electric. Then, with a swift motion, Kaelin stepped aside. "Leave," he commanded. "And do not take more than what you need." Aylin's brow lifted. His tone was curious, not cruel. She hesitated, caught between relief and suspicion. "And if I do not?" she asked, her voice a challenge as much as a question. Kaelin's eyes darkened, his presence suddenly more imposing. "Then you will see that defiance has a cost," he said, a warning as much as a promise. Aylin's lips curved in a faint smile. She didn't flee immediately. There was a strange pull she could not explain, a force in the room that made her heart quicken. It was not fear but fascination, and for the first time, she sensed that this man saw her for more than a thief, more than a rogue. Before she could speak further, she leapt toward the window, landing on the ledge below. Her body moved with the agility that had been honed through years of training. But as she ran through the alleys, she felt a strange weight. The pendant hidden in her pocket seemed to pulse, as though acknowledging the presence of Kaelin. By the time she reached the safety of the rogue hideout, her mind was racing. The gang greeted her with cheers and laughter, unaware of the encounter that had just changed everything. Aelin, however, remained silent, her thoughts tangled in the shadow of the man she had met. The city's rooftops were alive with whispers, rumors of a new power stirring in the north, a king who could see through the bravest hearts and the darkest lies, and now she had drawn his attention. That thought should have frightened her, yet it did not. Instead, it ignited something deeper, a curiosity, a challenge, a defiance that even she could not fully name. Later that night, as Aelin sat by a flickering fire in the hideout, she traced the outline of the pendant in her hand. It was delicate and old, and she felt a strange connection to it, as if it were calling her to something greater than the alleys and shadows she had always known. Her fellow rogues laughed and told tales of daring heists and clever escapes. But Aelin could not shake the image of Kaelin's eyes, sharp, commanding, and unexpectedly attentive. He had seen her. Not just the rogue, not just the defiance, but the spark of something hidden within her, something untamed. For the first time in her life, she wondered what it would mean to stand not just in the shadows, but under the gaze of a king who recognized her strength. And with that thought came both exhilaration and dread. Somewhere in the northern kingdom, Kaelin stared at a map of the city, his hand resting on the location of the noble estate. He had seen the rogue, the girl who moved like fire among shadows. He knew her name now, and he knew that she carried more than stolen treasure. There was power in her, raw and unrefined, and he was certain that the destiny of kingdoms, and perhaps of hearts, would be shaped by her choices. The night stretched on, the city breathing in quiet rhythms, unaware that a single encounter had set into motion forces that neither rogue nor king could fully control. Aelin drifted to sleep with the pendant close to her heart, unaware that it had already begun to weave her fate with that of the Alpha King. Cliffhanger. The next morning, as Aelin planned her next heist, a shadow fell across the rooftop, a figure tall and commanding, watching her with eyes that knew her every move. Kaelin had found her again, and this time he would not let her disappear so easily. Aelin awoke to the sounds of the city stirring beneath the early morning light. The rooftops glimmered with dew, and the narrow streets began to hum with the routines of merchants, guards, and beggars. She had barely closed her eyes when a creeping sense of unease settled over her. Something or someone was watching. Her instincts, honed through years of surviving in the shadows, told her to run. But curiosity held her in place. She crept toward the edge of the hideout's rooftop, scanning the horizon. There, across the alleys and rooftops, stood a tall figure, Kaelin, the Alpha King. His dark cloak fluttered slightly in the breeze, and his eyes, sharp and unyielding, followed her every movement. Aelin's breath caught, but she refused to show fear. Instead, she squared her shoulders and called out across the distance. "Why do you follow me?" Kaelin's expression remained unreadable. "Because you do not belong to the shadows entirely," he said, his voice carrying easily over the narrow streets. "There is more to you than theft and defiance." "I need to understand what it is." Aelin laughed lightly, a sound that carried both challenge and disbelief. "And what if I do not wish to be understood? What if I refuse to be part of your games?" He tilted his head, a subtle gesture that revealed a spark of amusement. "Refusal intrigues me more than compliance ever could. That is why I'm here." The rogue in Aelin bristled. She had always been free, moving through the world by her own rules, answering only to her instincts and her fellow rogues. Now a king dared to claim her attention, to impose his authority on her defiance. Yet beneath her pride, a flicker of fascination stirred. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, commanding without cruelty, powerful without arrogance. Aelin retreated into the maze of alleys, moving quickly but deliberately, testing whether he would follow. Kaelin did not rush. He walked with measured steps, each one deliberate, a predator who knew patience was its own power. The chase was not violent. It was a game of will, a contest neither of them could fully articulate. By midday, she found herself near the city gates, where merchants called out their wares and guards patrolled with distracted vigilance. She paused to catch her breath, brushing dust from her clothes. Her mind raced. The pendant she had taken from the noble estate rested against her chest, its weight oddly comforting. She did not understand why. but it felt connected to the man who now pursued her across the city. A sudden noise, a sharp clatter of metal, made her spin. Kalen stepped from the shadows as if he had appeared from thin air. "You cannot hide forever," he said calmly, yet there was no threat in his tone. It was an observation, a truth she could not escape. Elin squared herself against him, defiance burning in her chest. "I am not hiding. I am choosing where to be." Kalen's gaze softened for just a moment as though he recognized the fire in her words. "And yet your choices have brought you here into my attention. The world you know. It is not enough for you. You desire something greater, do you not?" Aelin's heart stuttered. She did not answer. Desire was dangerous, a word she had rarely allowed herself to think. But the truth lingered in her mind. She did not belong entirely to the alleys and shadows. There was a part of her deep and unacknowledged that longed for more than survival. "Perhaps," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm, "I desire freedom. Not kingdoms, not crowns, not kings." Kalen studied her, the tension between them stretching the moments thin. Then, without warning, he offered a hand. "Come with me, just for a time. I will show you what lies beyond these streets. Decide then whether freedom is truly what you seek." Aelin hesitated. Trust had never been easy. She had learned that every kindness could conceal a trap, every offer could hide betrayal. Yet the pull of curiosity, the spark of defiance that matched his own commanding presence, compelled her. Slowly, cautiously, she took his hand. The journey beyond the city was nothing like Aelin had expected. They passed through forests where sunlight danced on leaves like fire, across rivers that sang as they flowed, and over hills where the wind carried the scent of distant lands. Kalen spoke little, but each word he offered was precise, measured, and carried weight. Aelin found herself listening more closely than she intended, drawn not just to his words but to the presence behind them, the strength, the command, the unspoken loneliness. As night fell, they arrived at a stronghold perched atop a cliff, overlooking valleys and rivers that stretched to the horizon. Its walls were ancient, carved with runes and symbols that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. Aelin felt awe and fear in equal measure. She had been a thief, a shadow in the city, yet here she stood at the gates of power beside the Alpha King himself. Kalen did not offer comfort, nor did he demand obeisance. He simply walked beside her, silent and imposing. "This is the world I protect," he said finally, his voice echoing against the stone walls. "And now, you have seen a glimpse of it." Aelin's eyes roamed over the stronghold, taking in the guards, the towers, the banners that marked the reach of his dominion. The weight of responsibility pressed upon her chest. "It is vast," she murmured. Kalen's gaze met hers. "And it can be lost in an instant. Power is not given, Aelin. It is earned, defended, and sometimes feared." Aelin's defiance flared. "And yet you speak of fear as though it is a tool." "I have lived my life in fear, and I survived. I do not bow to it." A faint smile touched Kalen's lips. "Then perhaps you are the first to understand something I have long forgotten. Courage is more than obedience. It is defiance tempered with wisdom. You are dangerous, Aelin, not because of your strength, but because you refuse to be tamed." The words resonated within her, stirring something she had never acknowledged, the possibility that defiance could be more than survival. It could be power. They spent the night in the stronghold, Aelin restless and alert, unable to sleep amidst the unfamiliar grandeur and the quiet presence of the king beside her. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the scent of distant forests and the promise of storms. As dawn approached, a messenger arrived from the northern court bearing news of unrest among the nobles. Aelin watched Kalen as he read the message, his expression hardening. The kingdom was threatened, not by armies alone, but by treachery within, and somehow she felt that she had been drawn into it. Kalen turned to her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You will not remain hidden forever. The world beyond the alleys will demand choices you are not yet ready to make, and when it does, you will either rise to meet it or it will crush you." Aelin felt a shiver, not of fear but of anticipation. The rogue life she had known, the streets and shadows, felt smaller now, insignificant against the weight of kingdoms and curses and the strange pull of a man who saw her not as a thief, but as something far greater. She wanted to run, yet she did not. She wanted to resist, yet she could not. The defiance within her, sharpened by years of survival, now tangled with a curiosity she had never allowed. the desire to see what lay beyond herself, and the man who had claimed her attention without force. The day grew bright, yet the shadows of the night clung to her thoughts. She realized that the Alpha King had not just watched her, he had seen her, truly seen her, and that realization carried both danger and a strange thrill. Cliffhanger. As Aelin prepared to leave the stronghold to return to her rogue family, a sharp cry echoed from the walls above. Through the open gate, she saw a group of masked figures approaching, their intentions unclear, their threat immediate. Kaelin's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, his eyes meeting hers. "They have come for you," he said, voice low, "and this time I will not let you face them alone." The morning sun rose slowly over the northern stronghold, painting the stone walls in shades of gold and rose. Aelin stood at the edge of the courtyard, her dark hair catching the light, her eyes scanning the distant hills where the masked figures had vanished during the night. The city streets she had once called home now felt far away, a memory of shadows and whispers. Here the air carried weight and power, a constant reminder that she had stepped into a world larger than herself. Kaelin appeared beside her, silent as always, yet his presence was impossible to ignore. The Alpha King had not slept through the night, keeping watch over the stronghold and its defenses. His gaze followed hers as she considered the danger that still lingered beyond the walls. "They will return," he said quietly, his voice carrying both certainty and warning, "and they are not the only ones who wish to manipulate your past." Aelin's brow furrowed. "My past, what do they want from me?" Kaelin's dark eyes softened briefly, though the edge of authority remained. "You carry more than you realize, Aelin. That pendant you took, it is not just a trinket. It belongs to an old line, a family intertwined with the histories of kings and bloodlines. You were born into shadows, yes, but there is light in your blood, power that some would use to their advantage." Aelin's fingers touched the hidden pendant beneath her tunic. For the first time she felt the weight of her choices. She had always been a rogue, surviving by wit and agility. Now she understood that the very thing that had protected her, the fire in her spirit, the defiance in her heart, was also the reason she had become a target. Kaelin studied her, silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his words deliberate. "You do not have to face this alone. I can teach you. I can protect you. But the question is, will you let me?" Aelin hesitated. Trust had always been her armor, and giving it freely was impossible. And yet she could not deny the pull she felt toward him. There was a strength in Kaelin that did not demand surrender, but instead challenged her to rise, to match him step for step. Before she could answer, a horn sounded from the outer gate. The stronghold stirred to life, soldiers taking positions along the walls and battlements. Aelin followed Kaelin through the corridors to the tower where he kept watch, her heart quickening. The masked figures were returning faster and more organized than before. "They come for the pendant," Kaelin said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "And for you. But we will be ready." Aelin's pulse raced. She had fought in streets and alleys, faced thieves and guards, but this was different. These were trained fighters, determined and deadly, and yet despite the danger, a thrill coursed through her veins. She had never felt more alive. The first clash came at midday. From the walls, archers loosed arrows toward the attackers, their movements precise and practiced. Aelin watched as Kaelin moved among his soldiers, commanding with calm authority, his every gesture decisive. She realized then that he was not merely a ruler by name, he was a leader, a force that inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. When the attackers breached the courtyard, Aelin did not hesitate. She drew the small dagger she always carried, her movements swift and fluid. She moved through the chaos with the skill of someone born to survive, striking and evading, her senses alive with the rhythm of battle, and all the while Kaelin fought at her side. Their movements synchronized as though they had fought together for years. Amid the clash of steel and the shouts of soldiers, a figure broke through toward Aelin. She reacted instinctively, spinning to face the threat, and felt the presence of Kaelin behind her, his hand gripping her arm in a protective motion. Together they pushed the figure back, forcing retreat after retreat. The battle was brief but intense, leaving the courtyard strewn with the remnants of the attack. Aelin's chest heaved with exertion, her body alive with adrenaline. Kaelin's gaze met hers, sharp and assessing. "You have courage," he said simply. "But courage alone is not enough. You will need more." Aelin met his eyes, and for the first time she allowed herself a flicker of vulnerability. "Then teach me," she whispered, almost to herself. "Teach me to be more." Kaelin's expression softened, but only slightly. "It is not an easy path. You will face trials, not all of them from your enemies. Some will come from within." Over the next days, Kaelin introduced Aelin to the intricacies of the kingdom he ruled. She observed council meetings where nobles argued over lands, taxes, and alliances, their words heavy with ambition and fear. She learned the delicate balance of power, the subtle arts of negotiation, and the weight of command. At first she bristled, uncomfortable in a world so structured, so rigid. But gradually she began to understand that defiance alone was not weakness. It could be strength when guided by wisdom and strategy. Kaelin continued to watch her, noting her progress and the spark of intellect that matched her courage. In quiet moments he spoke of his own burdens, the curse that haunted his bloodline, the loneliness of leadership, and the sacrifices he had made to protect his kingdom. Aelin listened, her heart stirring with empathy and a strange admiration. She began to see him not just as a king, but as a man, shaped by duty, pain, and power. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Kaelin found Aelin standing alone on a tower balcony. The wind tugged at her hair and she gazed at the distant hills, lost in thought. "You have changed," he said quietly, stepping beside her. Aelin looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "I suppose I have," she admitted. "This world, it is different from what I imagined, and yet I feel alive in a way I never did before." Kaelin nodded. "The world is vast and danger is everywhere, but it is also filled with choices. Some are easy, some are impossible, and some define who we are." She turned to him, defiance and curiosity mixing in her gaze. "And what choice do you see for me?" Kaelin's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with the weight of truth. "You can continue as you have, living in shadows, surviving as you always have, or you can step into a life that demands everything of you, that asks you to be more than you ever thought possible. And that choice will change you forever." Aelin's heart pounded. She had always believed that freedom was survival, that strength was defiance, that her life belonged only to herself. And yet, standing beside Kaelin, she felt the stirrings of something new. The possibility that she could be more than a rogue, that her fire could illuminate a larger path. Before she could respond, a messenger arrived breathless, bearing a sealed letter. Kaelin broke the seal with a sharp motion and read silently, his expression tightening. "They have found the pendant," he said, voice low, "and they are sending forces larger than before. This is no longer a simple raid. They seek to capture you, and the power you carry." Aelin's breath caught. The pendant, the symbol of her unknown past, had drawn enemies to her, and now she realized her life was intertwined not only with Kaelin's world, but with the fate of kingdoms she had never imagined. Kaelin's gaze met hers, his eyes steady, commanding, and filled with an intensity that left her unsteady. "You will not face this alone," he said, his hand brushing hers briefly, a contact full of promise and warning. "If they come, we stand together." Aelin's defiance flared, tempered now with determination. "Then we fight together," she said, her voice firm. "I will not run, not from this, not from you." The night fell with a tense hush, the stronghold braced for the coming storm. Soldiers took positions along the walls. Guards patrolled the courtyards, and the distant hills seemed alive with movement. Aelin stood beside Kaelin, her heart pounding yet steady in its resolve. She had chosen her place. She had chosen to face what came next. And as the first flickers of movement appeared on the horizon, shapes advancing through the darkness, their intentions clear, Aelin realized that her life, her choices, and her heart were now bound to the Alpha King in ways she had never anticipated. Cliffhanger. As the enemy forces drew closer, Kaelin turned to Aelin, his voice low but fierce. "Prepare yourself. Tonight your defiance will be tested not by shadows but by fire, and when it is over, nothing will be the same again." The stronghold was alive with preparation. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long, moving shadows across the courtyards. Soldiers moved quickly, arranging defenses, checking weapons, and whispering warnings of the approaching forces. Aelin stood beside Kaelin in the highest tower, looking down at the activity with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," she admitted, her voice quiet, almost lost beneath the wind. I've fought in streets, alleys, and markets, but this is different. Kalen's gaze followed the horizon, dark eyes focused and unwavering. It is. What comes for you now is not just thieves or petty lords. They know the value of what you carry, and they will not stop until they take it. Or you. Aelin felt a flicker of fear, but it was tempered by something stronger. Determination. She had survived every challenge thrown her way. She would not falter now, not when the man beside her, the Alpha King, trusted her with more than just her life. Then I fight, she said, her voice steady. Not for them, not for me, but for this place, for you. Kalen turned, his expression unreadable for a moment, then softened slightly. And you will not fight alone. Remember that. Defiance is your strength, yes, but even the strongest fire needs guidance or it consumes itself. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, scouts returned with word that the enemy forces were drawing near. The masked figures were larger than before, moving with precision and intent. Aelin's chest tightened, but her hands remained steady. She had trained for moments like this, and yet she knew nothing could fully prepare her for the storm about to descend. Night fell like a curtain, and the stronghold held its breath. From the highest towers, archers took positions. Shields were readied, and magical wards glimmered faintly along the gates, casting a soft blue light. Kalen moved through the stronghold like a shadow made flesh, giving commands, checking defenses, and observing Aelin as she found her own place among the preparations. You will need more than courage tonight, he said, stopping beside her. You will need focus, wit, and trust. Trust in me, in the soldiers, and in yourself. Can you do that? Aelin met his gaze, dark eyes reflecting the torchlight. I can, she said. I will. The first wave struck as the moon rose high, silver light spilling across the battlements. Figures moved swiftly, scaling walls, striking at guards, and attempting to breach the gates. Aelin's heart raced, her hands gripping her dagger tightly. Every sense alive with anticipation. Kalen fought with a quiet precision, his blade moving in arcs of deadly grace, his presence commanding the soldiers and inspiring them to match his rhythm. Aelin moved alongside him, striking and dodging, the movements of a rogue honed over years now blending with the strategy of a soldier. Together, they formed a partnership that was more than coordination. It was understanding, instinct and trust forged in moments of danger. Amid the chaos, one of the masked attackers managed to slip past the front lines, moving directly toward the inner chambers where the pendant rested. Aelin's eyes followed the movement, and she reacted instinctively, intercepting the figure with a swift, fluid motion. Steel clashed against steel, and she felt the rush of battle, the thrill of survival, and the unspoken bond with Kalen, who had already noticed the threat and moved to flank the attacker. The fight was brief, but intense. Aelin's dagger found its mark, forcing the masked figure to retreat. Kalen's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, grounding her amidst the chaos. Well done, he said, voice low, and for the first time, his words carried more than approval. They carried recognition, a promise that she mattered beyond the moment. The attackers regrouped, stronger and more organized than before. Aelin knew this would not be the last attempt. She felt a strange combination of fear and exhilaration. She had always thrived in danger, yet this was different. The stakes were higher, and the presence of Kalen beside her made her heart beat in unfamiliar rhythms. After the immediate threat had been repelled, Kalen led Aelin to the inner sanctum of the stronghold, a room lined with ancient tapestries and runes that shimmered faintly. The pendant lay on a stone table, its intricate designs glowing softly in the dim light. You see now why it is important, Kalen said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of truth. This is not just a trinket. It carries power, history, and danger, and it has chosen you as its guardian, whether you like it or not. Aelin knelt before the pendant, running her fingers over its surface. She had always thought herself alone in the world, surviving by her wits and instincts. Now she realized her life was entangled with forces far beyond her imagining, and yet she did not feel fear as she had once felt it. Instead, there was a strange clarity, a recognition that she had been shaped for this moment. Kalen's presence beside her was quiet, but it was there, a grounding force she could rely on. She met his gaze, dark eyes searching, and saw something in him she had not expected. Vulnerability, the burden of command, and a growing admiration for her courage and defiance. Why do you stay by me? She asked suddenly, her voice soft but direct. You could command armies, rule kingdoms, yet you remain here with me. Kaylin's expression darkened, not with anger, but with thought. Because you are unlike anyone I have ever met. Your fire, your defiance, it challenges me, inspires me, and I admit, it stirs something I have long tried to deny. Aylin's heart quickened. She had never imagined that her defiance, her strength, and her independence could draw such attention. Not from kings, not from rulers, not from anyone. And yet, standing here with Kaylin, she realized that her life, her choices, and her very being had meaning beyond the shadows she had always known. Night deepened, and the stronghold remained on high alert. Scouts reported movements beyond the walls, more attackers, more shadows seeking the pendant and the girl who carried it. Kaylin and Aylin spent hours preparing, planning, and strategizing. The bond between them grew not through words alone, but through shared purpose, trust, and the unspoken understanding that they were stronger together. As dawn approached, the sky streaked with orange and violet, the air filled with the distant sound of drums, signaling the approach of a larger force, a challenge that would test not only Aylin's courage but Kaylin's leadership and their growing connection. Kaylin turned to her, his hand resting briefly on her arm, grounding her amidst the uncertainty. Tonight you will face trials not just of strength but of heart and will. You must trust yourself and you must trust me. Are you ready? Aylin looked into his eyes, seeing both the weight of command and the flicker of something deeper, a bond that neither of them could yet name, yet which had begun to take root. She took a deep breath, the fire of defiance and determination burning bright within her. I am ready, she said, voice firm. Whatever comes, I face it with you. Kaylin's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. Then let us meet it together. As the first light of dawn touched the walls, the enemy forces advanced, their shapes growing clearer against the morning mist. The battle that would define Aylin's place in this world, her strength and the connection with the Alpha King was about to begin. And in that moment she understood that her life had changed forever. Cliffhanger. As the enemy forces closed in, a shadow detached itself from the front lines, a figure more powerful and familiar than any she had faced before. Aylin's heart stopped as she recognized the shape, and Kaylin's expression darkened with a mixture of anger and concern. They have sent someone who knows you, he said quietly, and this will be the true test of your courage and your heart. The air was thick with tension as the enemy forces approached the stronghold at first light. Mist clung to the hills and the distant clatter of armor echoed like distant thunder. Aylin stood beside Kaylin on the highest tower, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear, determination, and anticipation. The moment she had trained for, the moment she had unknowingly prepared for her whole life was finally here. They've sent someone familiar, Kaylin said quietly, his dark eyes narrowing. Someone who knows you, someone who may try to turn your past against you. Aylin's breath caught. Her life in the streets, the alleys, the shadows had always been her armor. Now those very memories could be used to weaken her. She clenched her fists, defiance burning stronger than fear. Let them come, she said. I will not falter. Not now. Kaylin nodded, his hand brushing hers briefly. A grounding gesture, a silent promise that they would face this together. Good. Courage alone is not enough. Focus, strategy, and trust will win this day. And remember, I see you, Aylin, all of you. Every strength, every fear, every spark of defiance. The enemy force emerged from the mist, larger and more organized than ever before. At their forefront was a figure cloaked in dark armor, moving with a confidence that made Aylin's chest tighten. She recognized the silhouette immediately. Riven, a former ally from her rogue days, someone who had once called her friend, now turned adversary, working for those who sought the pendant and her power. Riven's voice carried over the mist. Aylin, he called, mocking and sharp. You've grown bold, but boldness alone cannot save you. Aylin tightened her grip on her dagger. I am not the same girl you knew, she shouted back, her voice echoing across the battlefield. I've learned, I've grown, and I fight for more than survival now. Kaylin's hand found hers again, and together they moved toward the front of the stronghold where the battle would be fiercest. Soldiers clashed with attackers, arrows flew, and the clash of steel rang like thunder. The energy of battle pulsed through Aylin's veins. This was no longer about petty theft or survival. It was about power, destiny, and the strength she had claimed for herself. Riven moved closer, cutting through soldiers with precise, practiced strikes. Aylin met him, their blades clashing with sparks, each strike a test of skill and will. She felt the pull of the past, memories of friendship and betrayal, and yet she did not waver. Kalen fought at her side, his presence steady, a force that gave her strength without diminishing her own. "You've grown strong," Riven said, breathing heavily, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "But this is not just about strength. It's about choice, and choices can break even the fiercest hearts." Aelin paused, considering his words. Choice. That was what had led her here. Her choices, her defiance, her willingness to rise above the shadows of her past. She looked to Kalen, his gaze steady, filled with unspoken trust and challenge. And in that moment she understood what she had to do. With a swift motion she feinted, drawing Riven off balance, and disarmed him, forcing him to retreat. Her chest heaved, not with exhaustion but with exhilaration. She had faced a ghost from her past and survived. Kalen's dark eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment the chaos of battle faded. There was no threat, no clashing steel, no danger, only recognition and respect. "You are more than I imagined," he said quietly, voice low but full of admiration. Not because of strength, but because of the heart that guides it. Aelin felt a warmth rise within her. For years she had relied only on herself, trusting no one fully, answering only to instinct and necessity. Yet here, in the aftermath of confrontation, she realized she had found someone who saw her fully, who matched her defiance with understanding and respect. The battle continued, but their partnership now became seamless. Kalen and Aelin moved through the enemy ranks as one, strategy and instinct combined. The soldiers, inspired by their presence, fought with renewed vigor. The attackers, facing the unyielding force of the stronghold and the bond between the Alpha King and the Rogue Girl, faltered and began to retreat. As the sun climbed higher, painting the battlefield in light, the remaining attackers fled. Silence settled over the stronghold, broken only by the soft groans of the wounded and the distant calls of victorious soldiers. Aelin lowered her dagger, her body trembling with adrenaline and relief. Kalen approached, his steps measured, eyes locked on hers. "You have faced this day with courage, wit, and strength," he said. "And you have proven what I suspected from the moment I saw you, that defiance can shape destiny, and that fire cannot be tamed, only guided." Aelin's chest heaved, but a smile touched her lips. "And you," she said softly, "have shown me that strength can protect without taking away the fire within. That courage is not just surviving, it's choosing to stand even when the world wants you to fall." Kalen's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. "Then perhaps we are more alike than I thought. You do not need to be tamed, Aelin. You need only to trust yourself, and me." The words carried weight she could not ignore. Years of survival, years of defiance had led her to this moment, a recognition of herself, and the possibility of connection with someone who saw her fully, without fear, without expectation, without judgment. As they stood together, the wind carrying the sense of the battlefield, the stronghold and distant forests, Aelin felt a clarity she had never known. She had faced enemies, confronted the past, and claimed her place beside a king who valued her not just for her skills, but for her heart, her defiance, and her courage. Kalen reached for her hand, this time not as a gesture of command but of partnership. Their fingers intertwined, a silent acknowledgement that their paths were now shared. "The battles are not over," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "The world beyond the walls will still test you. But today you have proven that you are more than a rogue. You are a force to be reckoned with." Aelin looked up at him, eyes bright with emotion. "And you?" she asked softly. "What will you do when the world tests you?" Kalen's gaze softened, and for the first time his stern mask seemed to fall. "I will continue to stand," he said, "because now I do not stand alone. And perhaps I have finally found someone worthy not just of defiance, but of trust, and more." The realization stirred something deep within Aelin. She had always believed she was alone in the world, surviving by wits and fire. Now she understood that strength could coexist with trust, that defiance could be paired with connection, and that love, unspoken, growing, undeniable, could exist even for someone who had lived entirely in shadows. The sun rose fully over the stronghold, illuminating the battlefield, the walls, and the distant horizon. Aelin and Kalen stood together, a rogue girl and an Alpha King, bound not by duty alone but by choice, defiance, and the spark of something greater than either had anticipated. Cliffhanger resolution. Aylin lifted her gaze to the distant hills, knowing that the world would continue to challenge them, that enemies would rise and that destiny was never fixed. But beside her, Kaylin's hand in hers, she felt ready. Not just for the battles to come, but for the life she had chosen. A life of courage, partnership, and the fire that had always burned within her. Together they were unstoppable. Together they were unstoppable. And for the first time she smiled fully, knowing that she had found not just survival but belonging, purpose, and perhaps a love worthy of her defiance.